You're lying in bed. The light is low. The air is still. Maybe a book rests nearby. Maybe a phone. But somewhere in your room, or maybe in a dusty drawer, there's an old typewriter, or the ghost of one. Something heavy, mechanical, built for rhythm and repetition. Something that once sang with clacks and dings, and now rests. Tonight, we're not just talking about the machine. We're tracing its lineage, its purpose, its danger. This is the story of the typewriter, how it was invented, how it changed lives, and how it helped take them. It starts not with ink or keys, but with silence, with the long, slow scrawl of a pen. Letters were once written by hand, with careful strokes and plenty of patience. But patience was wearing thin. Businesses were growing. Paperwork piled up. And in the mid-1800s, a new dream was forming, one of speed, consistency, legibility. That dream took shape in a man named Christopher Latham Sholes. Sholes was a printer, a tinkerer, a man who loved machines but loathed mess. Alongside inventors Carlos Glidden and Samuel Soule, he began building a writing machine in the early 1860s. Their first attempts were clumsy, more curiosity than solution. But slowly, they refined it. They used levers, springs, inked ribbons. It was all very delicate. It jammed constantly. But when it worked, it typed. The early models looked nothing like the sleek machines we picture today. They typed upward, meaning you couldn't see the letters as they were printed. They resembled sewing machines more than anything else. But in 1868, Sholes and Glidden filed a patent. And in 1873, the rights were sold to Remington, a company better known for guns. Yes, guns. Remington manufactured the first commercially successful typewriter in 1874. It was black, iron, intimidating. It bore the curves of Victorian machinery and the bite of modern ambition. It introduced the QWERTY layout we still use today, designed not for efficiency, but to prevent jams. From there, the typewriter spread. Offices buzzed with keystrokes. Stenographers tapped out letters in half the time. Writers discovered a new flow, their thoughts no longer trapped by ink. But it wasn't just a tool of productivity. It became a weapon. It started with a letter, then a word, then a page. The typewriter had proven itself. And now, the world was ready to use it. But as with many inventions that begin in quiet rooms, the typewriter didn't stay innocent for long. Because words, once organized neatly on paper, became orders, directives, declarations. And as governments grew, and borders hardened, and conflicts rose, the typewriter followed, tucked under arms, loaded with ribbons, and ready to serve. You don't always think of it as a weapon. It doesn't explode, it doesn't fire, it doesn't bleed. But the typewriter became a soldier in its own right, not on the battlefield, but behind it. In World War I, it clacked out troop movements, supply counts, medical rosters, casualty lists, typed in triplicate, filed, stamped, sent. Clerks hunched over keyboards in candlelit tents, translating the chaos of war into lines of tidy black ink. Reports of missing men, inventories of bullets, letters to mothers. The machine became essential, a kind of nervous system for the entire military body. And later, in World War II, it became even more powerful. The Germans had a machine, a strange, electrified cousin of the typewriter, the Enigma. It looked familiar. A keyboard, a platen, a place for paper to curl through. But what it printed wasn't language. It was code. Encrypted letters, Patterns disguised as nonsense, sent in bursts across airwaves, delivered by radio, typed with precision. And on the other side of the war, someone had to decode it. Someone had to look at a page of gibberish and find the message buried underneath. The typewriter became the ghostwriter of secrets, of spy networks, of counterattacks, of betrayals. Meanwhile, in cramped rooms in London, a quiet man named Alan Turing tapped out possibilities. Not on a typewriter, not exactly, but with one beside him, always within reach. Because when you cracked code, you still had to explain it. You still had to write the report, the summary, the instructions. It wasn't enough to solve the puzzle. You had to type it clearly so someone else could act on it. And if you got it wrong, someone could die. The typewriter wasn't the trigger, but it was part of the mechanism. Every bomb dropped, every mission launched, every name added to a list, somewhere, sometime, was typed. In offices far from the front lines, women sat in rows behind rows of typewriters, fingers flying, pages stacking. They typed names of people being moved. They typed directives for people being rounded up. In Nazi-occupied Europe, the typewriter became a quiet accomplice in horror. Bureaucracy made efficient. Death made organized. People weren't dragged out of their homes by the machine, but they were scheduled by it. They were documented, filed, forgotten. And sometimes, the final words a person ever wrote or ever read came from a typewriter. Not a poem, not a story, but a denial, a label, a sentence. Back in the United States, the war machine used typewriters too. Recruiters filled out enlistment forms. Officers signed orders. Presidents typed speeches. Factories rolled out Remingtons by the thousands, not just for secretaries, but for soldiers. And in the Pacific, in Europe, in Africa, wherever the boots marched and the bombs fell, the typewriter marched with them, pressed into wooden desks, carried in crates, guarded as carefully as rifles, because it was just as essential, just as powerful, just as dangerous, in the right hands or the wrong ones. The typewriter had become more than a writing tool. It was now a symbol of command, of legitimacy, of decision. If it came on typed paper, it was official. It was real. It could not be ignored. And in the fog of war, where chaos reigned and truth bent easily, that meant something. It meant that a machine, born from a desire to make writing easier, had become a tool of terrifying clarity. But war ends eventually. And machines built for conflict find new lives. The typewriter was no different. But war ends eventually, and the machines built for it, those that survive, are often quietly absorbed back into everyday life. Some are melted down, some are boxed away, and some just keep typing. The typewriter wasn't retired. It was reassigned. No longer pounding out battle orders or encrypted secrets, it found a quieter kind of power, behind desks, in embassies, on the tables of presidents and poets alike. Because after war comes paperwork. Peace may sound gentle, but it's built on documents, declarations, diplomatic cables, ceasefires, constitutions. Typed, not whispered, not shouted, but written in steady, black ink, character by character, with the same rhythmic clicks that once echoed through wartime tents. In post-war Europe, entire governments rebuilt themselves behind typewriters. Reparations were negotiated, treaties translated, borders reconsidered. Typed pages stacked like bricks, one negotiation at a time. And in newly independent nations around the world, the typewriter helped write the future. Young secretaries sat at second-hand machines, punching out the first drafts of new democracies. In India, in Ghana, in Vietnam, the typewriter didn't care about accent or language. It typed what it was told, and what it was told was history. Meanwhile, in the offices of booming cities, the typewriter became something else entirely. The engine of business, insurance claims, invoices, personnel files, promotions and terminations, hopes and warnings, all typed. Every business form you've ever filled out, every receipt your parents saved in a shoebox, every tax document that made your eyes glaze over, all, at some point, typed. The typewriter was the heartbeat of the modern office. And its operators? Often women. In the 1950s and 60s, secretarial work became a path forward, and the typewriter was both the gateway and the gatekeeper. Schools offered classes just for it. Young women sat in rows, learning to touch type, to format a memo, to re-roll a page with perfect margins. They were trained not just in skill, but in silence, to be fast, invisible, indispensable. They knew the machine's rhythm better than their own. They typed letters they didn't sign. They prepared reports they never read. And in the background of every important man was often a woman with sore wrists, carbon-stained fingers, and a Remington on her desk. Still, the machine carried status. To have your own typewriter meant something. To master it, to control its clatter, meant you belonged. It gave structure to thought, weight to intention, finality to an idea. Because once the ribbon touched the page, it was real. And while you could erase pencil, a typed sentence carried consequence. The world had fallen in love with the sound, that tapping, clacking, predictable rhythm. It was the soundtrack of every newsroom, every detective's apartment, every lonely writer's rainy night. The typewriter became more than useful. It became romantic, a symbol of the writer's struggle, the reporter's deadline, the poet's insomnia. Even if you never touched one yourself, you knew its music. And that music kept playing, even as the world changed around it. Because the typewriter, once used to draft war, to organize death, to rebuild the world, had become something more gentle, more human, a partner in progress. Not the loudest voice in the room, but maybe the one that made things official. And as the decades turned, it would change again. Not all at once, but gradually. The carriage return would fall quiet. The ribbon would start to fade, and something newer would rise to take its place. But not without resistance, because while the world leaned toward digital, the typewriter held its line. Not just out of nostalgia, but out of purpose, out of principle. Some things, it turns out, still wanted to be typed. Even as computers crept in, humming softly, blinking patiently, there were corners of the world where the typewriter remained sacred. In courtrooms, in small-town offices, in high-security government buildings where plugging in a device meant risking exposure. Typewriters couldn't be hacked. They didn't crash. They didn't update overnight without permission. They were slow, predictable, self-contained. They were trusted. In Cold War espionage, spies sometimes relied on typewriters for precisely that reason, to leave no digital trail, to whisper through keystrokes instead of code. In countries under authoritarian rule, dissidents used them to print underground newspapers. Samizdat, one careful page at a time, typed by hand, copied by carbon, passed hand to hand. The typewriter, once an arm of bureaucracy, had become a tool of rebellion. It gave voice to those denied one. Even artists weren't finished with it. Musicians used its rhythm. Painters used its parts. Writers clung to it like a ritual. There's something different about typing with no delete key, about knowing each letter is permanent the moment you press it. It makes you slow down. Think twice. Commit. In an era where everything could be undone, the typewriter refused to forget. And in homes, in closets, in garages, typewriters waited. Sometimes under dust covers, sometimes on display, sometimes hidden, still smelling faintly of ink and iron. Some were inherited, some were rescued, some were bought on a whim because the sound felt familiar. You could still find ribbon if you knew where to look, still hear the click and ding if you listened closely enough. In the 1990s and early 2000s, people began rediscovering them, not just as antiques, but as anchors, a way to unplug, to write without distraction, to return to a kind of intimacy lost in blinking cursors and endless tabs. Each page typed became a physical artifact, a record of thought, a map of decision. Mistakes stayed. Smudges told stories. The imperfection felt honest. The world didn't need the typewriter anymore. But that didn't mean it let go. There were still stories it wanted to tell. And people, strange, stubborn, hopeful people, who wanted to tell them with keys that clacked instead of keys that glowed. But something was shifting, not just in how we wrote, but in what we were writing on. The typewriter wasn't disappearing. It was transforming. The sound softened. The ink faded. The paper disappeared. But the keys? The keys stayed. Because while the typewriter itself might have seemed old-fashioned, bulky, noisy, stubborn, the idea behind it never left. It just changed form. Beneath the surface of every laptop, every tablet, every glowing screen you touch now is a ghost. The ghost of a typewriter. At first, the change was mechanical. Electric typewriters arrived, sleeker, faster, more responsive. No more hard slaps of metal arms striking ribbon. Instead, daisy wheels spun, letters danced, and motors purred. The IBM Selectric became a favorite in offices. Its spherical golf ball typing head rotated and pivoted, making crisp, consistent letters with satisfying speed. You didn't need as much force. You didn't jam the keys. You just typed, and the world typed faster than ever. But the big shift came quietly, when the screen began to matter more than the page. The word processor, a typewriter that could delete, that could rearrange, that could hold an entire paragraph inside itself before a single letter hit paper. No ink, no ribbon, no stack of whiteout sheets, just a blinking cursor. It felt magical, or terrifying, or both. Writers could experiment more freely. Editors could revise without erasing. Students could fix a sentence without starting the whole page over. Mistakes no longer left marks. They just vanished. And that changed something. Typing became less about precision, more about speed, more about spontaneity. The clack of keys turned into a tap. The carriage return became a gentle press of enter. The ribbon became a file. The paper became pixels. But the QWERTY layout stayed. The space bar, the shift key, the caps lock, the tab. All still here, still shaped by a machine invented over 100 years ago. The typewriter didn't die. It dissolved, merged, its DNA baked into every device you now carry in your pocket. When you send a message, when you draft an email, when you write a story late at night, alone in a quiet room, you're using a typewriter, or what's left of one. Even the sounds, the fake clacks, the retro keyboard apps, they're little tributes, echoes, because we miss the noise. We miss the rhythm. We missed what it felt like to make something one keystroke at a time. Even now, mechanical keyboards are coming back, not because they're needed, but because they feel right. That springy pressure, that tactile reward, that sense of doing something deliberate. Not just tapping glass. It turns out we weren't done with the typewriter after all. And in a strange way, the typewriter has always been about that feeling. The weight of words, the permanence of them, the courage it takes to commit a thought to the page without knowing if it's perfect. It began as a machine for the blind, became a machine for the masses, then a machine for war, then a machine for art, then a machine you carry with you every day. Not as iron or ribbon or lever, but as muscle memory. You still reach for it without thinking. Your fingers hover, your mind shifts, and something begins. A sentence, a story, a message, a memory. And all of it starts with a key, pressed, just like it always did. So maybe the typewriter isn't gone. Maybe it never really left. It just changed shape, like stories do, from keys to circuits, from paper to pixels, from sound to silence. But beneath every letter typed today is a whisper from the past, a rhythm, a clack, a presence. And somewhere, deep in the quiet hum of your screen, you can still hear it typing.